IVM.
Folks, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. I'm your host Anupam Gupta, B50 on Twitter, and today's episode we are going to talk about data. Lots and lots of data, in this case, macro-specific data. See, now to make any decision in investments, markets, economics, personal finance, you need data. And there are tons and tons of sources of data everywhere in specific. Today's episode, we are going to talk about India-specific data, right? Now, if you're wondering why is this important for personal finance, we'll get to that. Okay, let's take an example. What if you want to know how interest rate, GDP growth rates, India's fiscal deficit, current account deficit, all of that has moved in the past 20 years? It can have a bearing of your forecast for the future at an individual level, maybe at the office level, at an institutional level. So India-specific data is pretty important for all sorts of decisions. Now see, most of this data is actually available out there. You go to the budget site, you go to the planning commission site, Niti Aayog and all of that. So it's not easily findable. You can't possibly get all of it in one source. And believe me, you can get lost in the government websites. Or it can also be expensive. And all of this data, for example, would be available to you on a subscription package like a Bloomberg terminal or maybe CMI data or somewhere. But that also comes at a price. So today's episode is a really special one. We're going to talk about something called the India Data Hub platform. It's India's largest interactive data platform. And for you to get a better idea about what we're talking about and how it's important to you, I'm going to explain all of that with my guest, Ashutosh Datar. Ashu, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. Thank you so much for doing this for us. I believe we've got ex-bosses in common, but leave that apart. Tell us something about yourself and how you got started on India Data Hub. Go for it.
Thanks, Anupam, and it's great to be on this podcast. And it's great to finally be able to speak with you as well. We've sort of seen and heard a lot about you. So,
Thank you.
to give a background about myself, so I used to be the economist at IIFL's institutional equities desk until about a couple of years back. I did that job for about a decade, and I was sort of with JP Morgan before that, and so on. So I've essentially worked on macro data, macro strategy, stuff ever since I've started working in a sort of equity research industry. And I quit 2 years back, figured out what to do for the sort of 6 months or so thereafter, and finally decided that let's start with this some called India Data Hub. We were calling it something else at that point of time, but it sort of evolved into India Data Hub. And I saw the need for this as something that doesn't necessarily exist in a country like India. So the data that we have today is messy. It sits on various different platforms, different government websites. It's not easily available. And where it is available, it sits behind expensive paywalls. You mentioned the likes of Bloomberg, etc. So for an ordinary person to get a hang of what that data is, to even know what data is available, is a Herculean task. So we started off by with sort of this objective that we should make data available to people. They should know what is available, and they should have it sort of easily accessible so that they can make sense of that data, use it for whatever purpose they deem fit. And that's how sort of India Data Hub has started.
Excellent. So I'm going to pick up exactly from your answer into two different sections. One is, why should this data be important to people? Okay, now for you, you've worked in a brokerage. I have also worked in a brokerage, and I know the struggle, that you go to if you say just want to do a trend analysis of the last 20 years of India's fiscal deficit. You want to break that down into taxes, expenses, subsidies, etc. That is, we understand that. But beyond our, limited circle, number one, what is the use case? For what kind of audience is this important? And two, do you think that audience base is actually should be more than what it is right now? Because if you're talking about this, then you would probably look at an institutional audience. Whereas I personally believe that all of us, should have access to this data and should be more aware of our government finances and a lot of other stuff. So let's look at it both ways. One, who is it important? And two, should more people be interested?
Sure. So I see this as sort of catering to 3 or 4 different sets of audience. So one is obviously the investment community, of which both of us have been part of, and there from everything from your earnings estimates to valuation multiples to portfolio construction, sort of macro data becomes important to have the big picture view of what the story for India is, all of that. So everybody sort of appreciates that, and people use data, and that's sort of the the most apparent use case for this data. The second data is for businesses. I mean, businesses have real-time access to data that they see in their business, in their industry. But it is also important for them to have the macro sort of overall context in which their business or their company is operating. And I think hence this kind of data becomes important for them. Large companies sort of have teams which do that and sort of they fine tune or adapt their strategies based on how they see the business cycle or the economy evolving, both from a short term and long term perspective. But I think businesses in general should be using this data and sort of basing their strategies and policies based on that. The third, I think, from sort of a big picture, is sort of this data is in a sense a tool to judge policy, to
Hmm.
know what has happened in India, what is happening in India. So there was a policy intervention X. This resulted in Y based on data. Was that right? Was that correct? Was it better than expectation? Lower than expectation? How do you judge policy? So in a sense, this is in a sense the way we judge the government, different regulators who frame policy interventions for different sectors. So I think from that perspective, sort of as a tool of holding policymakers, regulators accountable, or just to know what's happened. They did this happened, or this is happening. I think this sort of data becomes very important. And I think the last is the student community. I think too often, or at least the way I was sort of studied, I hardly had any interaction. I studied business, finance, economics. It was mostly theory. There was hardly any
Hmm.
sort of real world data that I had access to, that I could connect the theory to and say, okay, this is what theory, this is the data. Is there's a theory match with data, doesn't match with data, or what it is. So I think from a student community perspective, people who are studying business or finance or economics, having data, sort of going through the data and sort of connecting theory with that data becomes important. So I think there's sort of three or four sort of different use cases that I can see
Hmm.
for this data.
I hear you, man. I mean, I remember when I was doing my one of my strategy notes. I didn't even know how to break down the budget. Like there is direct taxation, indirect taxation. Within that, there's capital receipts, revenue receipts. Within that, there is GST, income tax, etc.
Yeah.
And the best part is all of this is in the public domain.
Yes.
ऐसा नहीं है कि कि कहीं सीक्रेट में पड़ा है और हमको पता नहीं
Yeah.
किधर है, but it is all this is. So let me break this down to you, okay, Ashu, because see,
Yeah.
now you've entered into a domain which is, I would say, more retail facing, although I'm sure you've got a lot of institutional clients as well. This podcast, for example, is definitely aimed at individual listeners.
Yeah.
I remember when I started this podcast, I used to always wonder कि भाई already इतना data है, why are people not using it? So I
Yeah.
used to differentiate into source, access, and use. Okay, so
Yeah.
people are probably too lazy these days.
Yes.
If I tell them that, listen, you go to a company's website, you'll get 20 or some good companies are there. Infosys, for example, they give you annual report since inception, probably
Yeah.
since listing, or for the last 20 years. You can actually do that. So that is source. Okay, source अपने को समझ में आ गया. अभी source, it is there somewhere. I want you to tell me, I'll divide this. First, what is the landscape of source of all data in the government side? Second is access. Okay. Now I'll tell you what access is about. Access is nothing but awareness. How many people actually know this? Okay.
Yeah.
People now are more familiar with aggregation platforms, right? So something like a screener or something like
Yeah.
whatever, they want that other than go to a company website as such. And
Yeah.
the third is the actual utility. भाई ये सब मेरे पास आ गया, मैं करूंगा क्या इसका?
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm just translating that into India data. So you tell me first the source. Now, where all is generally India's macro data usually available? Okay. Two is, if I want to know more about it, what do I do? Okay. And three, now that you've given me one and two, मैं इसका करूंगा क्या? How should I ideally use this? So let's just talk about this. Go on.
Sure. So most of the data, pretty much all of the data that we pick up for India Data Hub comes from either the sort of one government website or the other government website. There is Ministry of Statistics, there is the Reserve Bank of India, Ministry of Agriculture, Planning Commission, or its sort of recent avatar, the Niti Aayog, Department of Health, etc., etc. So this is all sort of data that we pick up from different government sources. What we do then is we clean the data. Often we find that there are errors in sort of government data. Mostly these are sort of errors of entering the data or transcribing data. There's an extra zero, or sort of there is one less zero, and sort of it's very apparent that there is sort of such kind of error. So we clean that data, and we provide that in a structured format. Whereas if you go to a government website, the data might sit in a PDF. It could be a scanned image of a PDF, which sort of very difficult for you to get about.
I
So
know
that's
that
what we
scan
do.
PDF.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that scan PDF. It's a real pain.
But by far, I think the biggest sort of value addition that we are trying to do with this is to tell people what data is available. I mean, it's sort of hard for you to even know what is available because you don't know where to start off with. If I want to understand
Exactly.
labor market, for example, I don't even know what if I'm an institutional investor or if I'm a analyst at a sell side brokerage house, I probably have some idea of what data is available. Where do I go? But if I'm not in sort of in that league,
Say
how do I know what is available?
if you're a policy think tank or if you're an NGO, because
Yeah,
labor has a lot of NGOs also working. Where will you go to
exactly.
say, let's see, okay, industrial worker wages for the last 20 years? Is
Yeah.
this there? Is this there actually there?
Industrial workers' wages is there for some years, yes, and rural wages is there for last 15 years,
Wow. And where would this
including at
be?
a different category level, from mason to harvester,
Oh, shit.
sort of all of that.
Kidhar hai
Yeah.
ye sab? Where is all this, man?
So this sits, for example, in Ministry of Labor. There is a two websites of Ministry of Labor. There is old website and a new website. The old website has some data. The new website has some data. So it's
Wow.
sort of a mess for you to figure out. Yeah. So
Okay,
knowing
let's
what
go
data
next.
is available is by far, I think, the biggest sort of value addition of you. So that people know, okay, this is available. Whether they want to use it from R or go to the primary source, that sort of becomes their choice. But just to know what is available in India, I think that's the start, and then the cleaning of it and providing it in a structured format, etc., etc. So it just makes, so we're trying to make your job easier if you want to play with data rather than sort of figure out kya hai, where do we take it from, and sort of so on.
Yeah. So now I'll get to access and use.
Yeah.
Okay, because so we are in 2020 and there's this website called data.gov.in. Okay,
Yes.
ये मेरे ख्याल से recent phenomena because I don't recall using it say back in 2012 or 2011. तो पता
Yeah.
नहीं ये कब आया, but I don't think it's the most impressive of website. I mean, the effort is great, the initiative
Yes.
is great, the intent is great.
Yes.
But I'm not too sure about the output. Can you just walk us through, if I'm someone who doesn't know about India DataHub and I'm probably just on Google, or my Google
Yeah.
पे search डाल दिया, in
Yeah.
my experience, most of my queries now land up at data.gov.in.
Yes.
So tell us
So
about this.
So the data.gov.in is a very good initiative from the government in essentially making data accessible, democratizing the data, etc. What that site suffers from is two or three things. One, it is sort of hard to find the data that I'm exactly looking for unless that is the first hit that I get. B, the data is not always updated. So if I look for agriculture production, for example, the data might be 2 years dated, and it sort of becomes less useful for me. And third, what it sort of essentially just gives me is the CSV without necessarily any sort of context or caveat for the data, which is something that we're trying to do. So it's a good start. I mean, as a user of data, as somebody who is fascinated by data, I would love to see the government sort of develop that and sort of make it more user friendly, accessible, etc. But it's not there yet. When it gets there, we don't know. But sort of that's the problem with data.gov.in, and sort of a similar problem with the RBI's website.
Good.
It has a lot of data, but it's not necessarily always up to date, and it's sort of very difficult to get data out of it.
And data.gov.in is an aggregator, right? It just
Yes,
brings you data from other sources, right?
yes, absolutely, yes,
That's what I thought. And RBI, I thought was doing a good job, but I was just on that site a couple of days ago, trying to get some price data, some inflation related data, and बाप रे यार, कितना price series है boss? वो 99 का price series दे रहा है मेरे को, 2005 का दे रहा है, 2012 का दे रहा है. I was like, first of all, why aren't you backdating this? It's
yes,
like the simple GDP calculation. Why is there not a backdated series of the latest price, the latest prices that you're taking?
exactly.
So anyway, what I'm getting to is this, Ashu. Last question in this first part of our episode. I want you to tell our listeners why this is important to us at an individual level. अभी मेरे को what I'm trying to say is that let's say मेरा WhatsApp में किसी के साथ झगड़ा हो गया जोर से, अरे इसके अंदर GDP growth ऐसा था, उसके अंदर GDP growth ऐसा. You know what I'm talking about? Okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
It happens on social media, happens on WhatsApp, happens on. So I'm saying that here's the thing. Okay, let's forget our political leanings and all. छोड़ दो उसको बस.
Yeah.
Do you think that we as a society, as people, are even data focused? We say that, listen, मेरे को डिसीजन लेने का है. I want to take a decision whether it could be I want to start SIP, whether I want to analyze a company, or whether I want to buy government securities or whatever.
Yeah.
Do we have a data focused thinking in our mindset? One, if yes or no, how important is it from your point of view to making better decisions?
Yeah. So what I've come across is sort of two sort of very distinct sets of people. One who sort of know what data is available, how to use it, and sort of so on. And I've sort of seen a tendency amongst others to dismiss data. And to
Huh?
dismiss data
Where is
because
it?
data tends
What are
to be
you saying?
noisy and messy. It is not
Dismiss
going to
data.
give you a clear answer of whether Prime Minister X has done a good job or a bad job. So we want to think in terms of binaries, but the real world data doesn't sort of is not amenable to that kind of thinking. It requires you to think probabilistically. It requires you to have a working hypothesis and then keep on developing that, change it, and it requires there's a skill required in being able to navigate real world messy data. And because it doesn't always match with our intuition, with our ex ante beliefs, and so on, it's sort of just easy to dismiss it and say this, just dismiss it more. So I think what we need is a paradigm sort of being able to think in terms of this is the reality. Data is fact. uh, it might it might not agree with our view, it might not agree for certain reasons, but this is what it is, and I have to accept that as a reality and then see how it fits into what I'm trying to do, rather than trying to force fit our own intuitions or our own beliefs into data as sort of interpreting data in sort of reverse manner. So I've seen people dismiss data just because it is messy, and I think in today's world we are talking about data analytics being a big deal, AI and ML and all of that. Just dismissing data because it is messy is just not done.
Good. Now I want you to give me examples of your argument. Okay, let me
Yeah.
start. Let me give you my example. Okay, because I've got so many of them. Popular theory:
Yeah.
retail money is dumb. Okay, it always
Okay.
buys when the market is high and sells when the market is low. Okay,
Okay.
great theory probably has some correlation. If you look at the data in the past, whatever,
Yeah.
you'll find that अच्छा ठीक है, market bottom हो गया, लोग अपना सब कुछ बंद करके equity छोड़ रहे हैं. ठीक है.
Yeah.
That entire argument went for a toss this year. Why?
Yes.
Because in March, you actually had much higher activity.
Yes.
So I'm saying that what I'm trying to tell you is this, that you have a perception and then you've got data.
Yeah.
Okay. The data changes, you also have to change your mind, na boss?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I want to just wrap up this first part with, if you can give me some examples of how critical it is for you to have data on your side when you are making an argument, and if the data is messy, any examples of that? Anything that has, for example, surprised you. You
Yeah.
went in with a preconceived idea, or let's say you had a discussion with somebody,
Yeah.
or you knew, अरे boss, तुम data नहीं देख रहे हो, तुम यहाँ फट्टेबाजी कर रहे हो, फट्टेबाजी तो सब कर सकते हो.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just wrap this up with some specific examples for our listeners.
Sure. So, just a couple of days back, I was discussing with someone about demonetization. I am personally not the biggest fan of demonetization, but when demonetization happened, the expectation was that there is probably people will start to use digital modes of payment, and so we probably will not need as much currency in circulation as before. And what we've instead seen is that you've seen currency in circulation come back. It is now it's now same as sort of the long-term average relative to GDP. But you've also seen digital payments take off. I mean, UPI, which was pretty much zero at the time demonetization happened, is now the third or the fourth largest payment mode in the country in value terms. So you've seen, so the data is messy. Cash has come back in the same number as before, and yet people have also started to use digital modes of payment and UPI is a retail mode of payment. The average transaction size in UPI is 1,500, 2,000 rupees. So small ticket payments are happening through UPI, and yet you have cash. So this is sort of an irrelevant example. Now, how do you make sense of this data? Is cash being now people storing cash as black money, which is sort of one of the arguments that was made before, or is it sort of a rural-urban divide that urban India has moved to digital modes of payment while rural India has not made, and hence the need for cash there. So these are all sort of questions that you will get deeper. But A, I didn't expect cash to come back, and B, this is an example of a sort of a contradictory sort of finding in sort of real world data, and you sort of somehow have to have a theory that unifies that and sort of helps make sense of what these two divergent data points are essentially trying to convey.
Oh yeah, man. I feel that I should do an entire episode with you on these things because we haven't spoken about data in COVID. Yeah. That's one of the biggest things happening. But
Yeah.
that would be digressing. So, folks, just we are going to go into a small break right now. On the other side, we are going to get deep into India Data Hub. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I want to let you all know about two new shows that we've launched this week. The first one is Millennial Athlete, hosted by Tanvi and Shlok. Both of them are, they spent their life playing badminton, and they know a lot of athletes, and they want to talk about the particular challenges that athletes face. Really, really great conversations. Do definitely check that out. The other show that I wanted to mention to you that we launched this week is Non Curry. Non Curry is a show it's about food and the history of food and the economics around food and its consumption and all that kind of stuff. It's a really, really interesting conversation. It's hosted by Sadaf, he's an author chef and former MasterChef India finalist, and Archit, who is a researcher who writes on behavioral science and economics. Definitely worth checking out. Besides that, we had a great week as always, right? Great stuff on all the normal shows. Do check those out. But with that, let me get you back to your show.
And welcome back to this special episode of Paisa Vaisa. My guest Ashutosh Datar of the India Data Hub. On the first part of the episode, we spoke about the importance of data, where it's available, why it's difficult to get, and why you should be thinking more about data in your life in general. Ashutosh, now tell us about your company, about your firm, your venture. Tell us about India Data Hub, and specifically now, how do you solve the problem that we defined in the first half? Let's go with that.
Sure. So we started working on India Data Hub about 18 months back, towards the end of 2018 or so. It started off as a hobby project. It's something that we wanted to just make it and see where it goes. It's still sort of a hobby project to me personally because sort of data is just so fascinating to me. So what we're doing at India Data is sort of two distinct things. One is, of course, we are putting together data from different government sources, cleaning it, providing it to users in a structured format, which is sort of the stuff that sort of most database companies do. So that's the one part of it. But the other part, which is probably as important, if not more important to us, is to build interactive tools on the platform. So we sort of want to move away from just being a provider of CSV dumps of data to something sort of a passive provider of data to something that allows people to interact with data, to sort of make sense of data, to go from sort of data to intelligence or insight. So the dashboards, for example, that we are building on our sort of platform give you at a glance view of sort of the topic for which the dashboard is built. It could be high frequency indicators for India. It could be the big picture of India or demographics of India, etc. The apps that we have, for example, sort of present sort of neatly tabular data for detailed data where you have like 100, interrelated indicators for a data set with sort of interactive tools sort of customized for that data set, so to allow you to interact with data. Then we have the visualization engine, for example, where you can visualize the data in different charts, you can add different indicators, you can transform data, you can do statistical analysis, etc. So that's all of that is sort of aim to get you build interactivity on the platform. So that's the second part. The third part is we're also trying to provide sort of some context or nuance for the data, so you sort of better understand what that data is. There are some terms that sort of are sort of something which is not apparent. I mean, if I tell you tax revenue, it is very apparent, intuitive what that term means. But there are some specific terms in different sectors. For example, it's not necessarily apparent what it means. So we're trying to add sort of nuance of what it connotes, or if in case of some data there is some caveat, we're trying to sort of add that so users know what they are looking at. So we're mapping relationship between different data sets. So okay, how is currency in circulation linked to money supply, for example. So we are trying to do those mappings as well, so you sort of know the overall relationship amongst data. We're not there fully yet. We've probably still some work to go, some aspects to focus on, and so on. But I think we've come a long way in the last 18 months. So this is sort of the whole concept, sort of moving away from just being a provider of data or sort of a database to a tool where people can interact with data, derive their insights, and sort of make sense of data. So that's really what we're trying to get at eventually. and how
Yeah.
we are.
I mean, what I was saying was I'm actually on your website and I'm just, as they say in social media, head explode because, so you've got. So I just went into India at a glance. There are all sorts of
Yeah,
tabs out there. I just thought I go for this. I really like that you've put absolute numbers and per capita,
yeah,
and you've put that in nominal and purchasing power parity and inflation. So these are like what you think are the big picture numbers that you want people to know if they
yeah,
just talk about India. There's a whole lot of them. There are probably about 16 or 20, but there's nice in a very nice format. There are tiles out here,
yeah,
and it's got everything. 72% of GDP is total government debt and government expenditure, FDI. So there's a lot. I mean, so I was just trying to understand that there are three things out here. One is what kind of data you actually put out here. And going by this, I think, like you said, there are thousands of indicators.
yeah,
The second is the presentation, okay, because all of this is pretty appealing. And the third is the downloadability, because ये
yeah.
सब तो मैंने देख लिया, अभी इसको मैं download. So all three are there, right?
Yes,
Excellent.
yes,
So if you're done with the dashboard with the site, I actually want to go to the report.
yeah,
Okay, great. So now, sometime back, since I think we're probably connected to each other on LinkedIn,
yeah.
and this is just to give the listeners some perspective as to how I got to know about India Data Hub. Who was it? I think it was Swanand that model.
Swanand, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah. So Swanand put this. And he's on a sabbatical. क्या है boss? So that guy now he's
Yeah,
going into a different. अच्छा, Ashu, if
yeah,
you know him, you please tell him मेरे podcast पे ही आ जाओ. I don't know if he can pay Lynn
yeah.
Morgan's compliant, but sorry for the digression, folks. It's just that Swanand is such an interesting guy.
He's an awesome guy.
So
Yeah,
he's an awesome guy. So I saw his posts out there talking about India Data Hub, and that's how I came to know of Ashu. And of course, I knew him from his previous work at India Infoline, but so that is a linkage. Now here's the thing: there's also a report that India Data Hub prepares,
yeah,
and I went and I downloaded that report, and for reason that Ashu is actually now going to tell us, that report is free of cost. पता नहीं ये बंदा क्या कर रहा है, but the kind of data that I got in the report was awesome. So his thing is that you download the report and you pay what you want to pay. So I paid $1,000 because I thought that probably even that is on the lower side of the quality of data and the presentation that I'm getting. So Ashu, all yours. Tell us about the report.
yeah. So we published our first book called the Data Book State of India. So we anticipate Data Book to be sort of a mother title under which there will be a series of books we will do. So these books, in a sense, we curate the data, we sort of curate the visualization, and there is just data in it. There is no interpretation of data. There is no analysis. We don't tell you this is good, this is bad. We just give you, this is sort of an at a glance, bird's eye glance or information of India, the big picture view on India, or sort of depending on what topic we pick up next. This is all that we do. It's a concise, small A5 book. We will now be available even in print. So this is the first book. The book aims to be informatory. It helps to explain things to you rather than to sort of give a qualitative assessment. This is all about telling you at a glance of different aspects of India, from demographics to exports or to government sector, government finances, the sort of what is happening. So you get at a glance view, and sort of there are a few such books that we have in mind to do over the next year or so that we'll do. So it's sort of, yeah. So for the first week or so, we made the book available under pay what you want basis. We sort of have reached a distribution agreement with someone, so we can't make it available on that basis anymore, but it's still available at a reasonably low price. But yeah, so we want to do that. So the data book plus the interactive tools, in a sense, are what we aspire to do. We want to move away from just being a passive provider of data, where we are a passive player and sort of people can use it the way they want, to actively help people understand the data, the nuances of data, and make sense of data. So that's really what sort of all of this is aiming for.
Great. So I have to ask here because when I downloaded the data and the stuff that I got, I thought was pretty valuable. I paid what I paid. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure that you're also seeing now what people are or are not paying for the book. So I have to ask you because I'm sure that this question is on the mind of a lot of listeners. Where are you going with this, and what exactly is your business model? Last question.
Sure. So we should there is a lot on our plate, so we want to continue to build a platform, sort of add data, more granular data. So we have data for India and the states. We would like to sort of go even granular level where we can. build more tools for people to interact with data, sort of publish more data books, etc., etc. So that's the game plan. We have a sort of hands full for the next, easily for the next 12, 18 months. From a business perspective, at some point of time, we will move to a subscription model. We'll have a sort of a freemium kind of a model or a sort of a tiered subscription. But unlike but we don't think public data should cost a bomb. So whenever we go to a sort of a move to a paid model, this will not cost a bomb. This will ideally cost less than a cup of coffee. So that's essentially what we are trying to get at. The underlying raw material that we use, which is data on government sites, comes to us at sort of no cost. So all we are charging for essentially is for the tools that we are creating, and that shouldn't cost you lakhs of rupees. So it should cost you in the thousands, perhaps. So that's essentially. So we will move to a freemium sort of paid subscription model, but unlike sort of traditional databases, we don't intend to charge a bomb for this. There's no reason why it should cost a bomb in the first place.
Well, that's a fundamental discussion, because I think I'll tell you the value that you add. Okay, Ashutosh, two things. Yeah. One that you add is data cleaning. Yes. That requires a level of skill. Okay, and I feel that skill should come at a price, because that is not who moves ka nahi hai. The kind of data that gets dumped now from the government websites is at a different level. You've done it, I've done it, we know. Yeah. Usko jo clean karne ka process hai. Arey boss, who uploads scanned images here?
Yeah.
It is 2020. I can understand if you are uploading scanned images of the 1960s, 1950s. ठीक है, वो टाइम पे कंप्यूटर नहीं था, no problem. अरे बस 2020 चल रहा है यार. And these are important policy documents, by the way. Okay, so first I feel that there is some amount of intelligence, some amount of cleaning that you do. Second is the visualization. See, here's the thing. What I believe is analyzing data is one skill. Visualizing data is a separate skill. I'm very clear about that, because the people who have both are truly gifted. And there is where I think that the data that the output that I'm seeing either on your the book that I bought or your website, I think that is somewhere in that domain. So I think you guys should, probably okay, maybe don't charge a bomb, but please don't be philanthropic and altruistic also. Okay, it's just my point of view, because I can tell you for a fact that there are many startups out there, many venture capital firms, many private equity firms. The day that you guys decide to go down to sector level data, okay, ये तो macro है. Okay, and even this has a great utility. Okay, because half the people who didn't know what India's GDP was 20 years ago. Well, me and Saurabh Mukherjee, we've just come out with a book, but the central arguments that we make start with the fact that India's GDP has tripled in the last 20 years. So when you put this in context, the point that we make is nowhere on the planet outside of China has this even happened. People forget, people are not even aware of that. So I'm saying that, I'm just leaving you with that thought. I'm more than happy to have you again on our show. Maybe once you've got lots and lots of subscribers, lots and lots of clients, and you've become really big. More than happy to have you back. But this is a wrap, folks. This is a wrap on this episode. For those of you who are wondering why is macro data important for personal finance, well, Paisa Vaisa. Guys, we talk about everything on this planet that is related to money and making smarter decisions about money. Okay, and I can tell you easily 3 or 4 use cases of how this can be useful, but I'll let you explore on your own. Ashu, just tell all our listeners your website.
Yeah, it's www.IndiaDataHub.com.
Okay, and how can they reach out to you? Where can they, if they want to reach out to you with some googly of a query? I've got, I remember in the job that we used to do, there were a lot of googlies that used to come in from our clients. How can they reach out to you?
The easiest way is to tag us on Twitter, or you can DM us. We are on Twitter at IndiaDataHub is our handle, or you can write to, you can just ping me on LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn page. So social media is the best and the easiest way to get in touch with us. There is also a feedback form on our site where you can sort of leave us a message on the site, and we'll come to us and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
Oh yeah, there it is, folks. The Twitter handle is IndiaDataHub. That's INDIA, India, Data, DATA, and HUB Hub. IndiaDataHub. Go ahead and reach out to them. Check them out. The products that they've got, the website that they've got. And Ashu, thank you so much for doing this for our listeners. I wish you all the very best for IndiaDataHub.
Thanks, Anupam. It was great to be with you today.
And with that, that's a wrap on this episode of Paisa Vaisa. Listeners, if you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or IVM Podcasts IndiaDataHub.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are IVM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. If you reach out to me, well, you know me, I'm P50 on Twitter, and thank you for listening to Paisa Vaisa.
No material on this show should be considered as financial advice. The material on this show is for informational purposes only. Please consult a financial advisor before taking any investment decision.
Whether you're an established sports person or a budding one, or simply a sports enthusiast, join us, Tanvi and Shlok.
We are two passionate pro badminton players talking policy, mindset and everything sport.
So tune in to The Millennial Athlete every Monday.
Only on the IVM Podcast Network.
Trust us, it's gonna be lit.
पेश खिदमत है आपकी शान में हमारे अंजुमन से. Hi, I am Sadaf.
And I'm Arshit. खाने का इतिहास, economics, policy, psychology, सब है मेन्यू पे.
Only on the Nankali podcast every Wednesday. सिर्फ IVM podcast ऐप या वेबसाइट पर या फिर जहां से भी आप अपने पॉडकास्ट सुनते हो.